Few stories on China here. The Philippines warns China that they have a mutual defense pact with the U.S. and shouldn't be meddling around in Philippines claimed territory. Now, this is really interesting because a couple of years ago, the Philippines actually tried to make an effort to like pivot towards China and away from the U.S. And when that didn't work out, they, came back and are pivoting back towards the US, but now they're using the US to threaten China, and this seems like one of the countries where I put in a category like Turkey, where there's so many human rights violations within the country with Duterte's drug war. There's all these other territorial disputes that are fairly complicated, and the best situation for it would be for the US to, again, treat the Philippines like a normal country. We had trade with the Philippines. Filipinos could come visit America, move to America, whatever, doesn't matter, but we shouldn't pledge to defend the Scarborough Shore for the Philippines over, in a war against China, and that's what the Philippines is asking us to do. The U.S. has moved more troops into Taiwan in the past year. The number of troops that are usually there has doubled from 20 to 40, according to this report from Foreign Policy. And this, by the way, comes after Joe Biden had a virtual summit, and not an actual one, with Chinese President Xi. And so this was a chance, for the U.S. to like maybe improve its relationship with China a little bit. But after, the U.S. meeting with Xi, the U.S. sent an invitation to Biden's Summit of Democracies. I think they invited like representatives from 109 countries, and then also Taiwan being 110. But not Russia, China, and other countries. And so, the whole thing is just so silly. Even the Washington Post is reporting that the U.S. supports the majority of the world's dictators. And it's, and this idea that Russia and China stand for authoritarianism and aggression on autocracy, and it's the U.S. that stands for democracy, and we have to promote that. And, not realizing that, let's say, the U.S. sells weapons to Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, and all these other countries where, the situation, the human rights situation is absolutely atrocious. These are absolute monarchies, right? And there's no like recognition of that whatsoever. And really what it is, it's just Cold War rhetoric, right? What they're trying to do is they're trying to give Americans a dividing line, a very clear propaganda line. We're good, we're democratic, they're bad, their authoritarianism. You're either with us, with the democracies, or you're with them, with the authoritarianism. It was that communists and capitalists. It's the same thing. They're trying to roll it out again. Please don't fall for it. Anyways, with this particular summit, again, it's really just used to stow tensions with China and Russia at this point. The U.S. also sailed a warship through the Taiwan Strait. I don't know how many. We're well over 10 in the past year, and I think we're maybe on 11 or 12 just for Biden now. It was a guided missile destroyer, the USS Millis, and I'm not sure what the point of this is, to continue to operate these exercises and stuff like that. The U.S. will say, "Oh, we're showing China that the Taiwan Strait has to be open to transit, and the dividing line between China and Taiwan and all this other stuff." It means absolutely nothing. China isn't prepared or isn't preparing to invade Taiwan, and the only thing that's making China have more of a military buildup in that direction is the fact that the U.S. is militarily building with Taiwan and increasingly threatening China all the time about a slew of issues. So real issue here. Taiwan will be increasing its defense spending, but only by 8.6 billion over the next 5 years. I think U.S. senators have discussed giving Taiwan $1 billion a year, which really isn't all that far off of the mark that this massive spending, according to for Taiwan, is happening. So I think it just goes to show exactly how concerned Taiwan is with with the China threat overall, that they're really not spending that much on their military at this point. And A lot of what they buy are U.S. weapons, and it seems more like they're just trying to buy favorability from the U.S., than weapon systems at times. Let's see. The U.S. began a new set of war games off of Japan's southern coast in the Philippine Sea with Canada, Germany, Australia, and Japan. This is another major escalation and, sign to China that the U.S. is trying to rally a Cold War type alliance. You have a European, a North American ally, and then two allies from the region, but very differently, China and Japan, all working together in anti-China military drills. Now, the next article I have has a couple really interesting things in it. The first, it's pointing out here that the U.S. is, with the AUKUS treaty, going to be increasing its air and space ties with Australia, which shouldn't come as a real surprise. The U.S. is going to help them build nuclear submarines. Why not help them build missiles or something else? But in this article from Air Force Magazine, which is an independent 501c3, although if you look at their website, they got Air Force sponsorship all over it, so I assume they get a great amount of money from the Air Force. But right in here, the first line is Australia is declaring its allegiance to the global rules-based order, and then it says the U.S. Defense Department's code for keeping China in check. And so it's just, this is one of the most blatant omissions that I've seen from somebody getting pretty close to the Pentagon, just openly admitting the whole global rules-based order isn't about like rule of law, isn't about keeping Russia in check because they're a bad country, or, taking on China because they violate human rights and threaten sovereignty and all this kind of stuff. It's really just about the new Cold War, code and slogans and all that. And the rules-based world order is just anti-China policy. Simple as that. So there is this Chinese tennis player who I, previous to this, had never heard of, although I'm not like a big fan of tennis. I know like the name of 3 tennis players, I think. But this particular woman is Payne Shui, and she accused a high-ranking member of the Chinese Communist Party of some sort of sexual assault. I didn't look at all the details, and if I'm understanding, he was alleged to have done more to her. I apologize, but it's some sort of sexual crime committed against her. I have no reason to doubt her. A government official taking advantage of his position and abusing an athlete wouldn't surprise me at all, and it's not like we haven't heard of Larry Nassar or anything like that before. That makes me question this at all. However, after she made this claim towards the beginning of November, she hadn't made a public appearance for about 10 days, maybe 2 weeks, and there started to be calls from, I think at first, like maybe concerned tennis players. It could have been, I don't know how this all started. Maybe it was facilitated in some way, or maybe, her friend was like, hey, I haven't heard from my friend in a couple weeks, so I'm going to put something out on Twitter because it's kind of weird. And, she just made this claim against, this government figure. And so hopefully, she's not being like silenced, or there's not some kind of repercussion against her. Well, it's piled very quickly. And when you have the world's all top tennis players and some sports figures calling for her to like be able to make some kind of public statement and everything like that. Of course, this was happening literally 2 days after Gavin Newsom made his public appearance after a booster shot in 10 days without being in public at all, and everybody being called an insane conspiracy. I didn't talk about it on the show. I didn't think it was that big of a deal. However, I did see people losing their absolute minds, calling people conspiracy theorists for wondering if, maybe he had some kind of side effects or what was going on, because the governor had been very public before that. And here you have people wildly speculating that the Chinese party had killed her, or was torturing her, all this other kind of stuff. And it's like, maybe there's a realm for especially private people to call for her, hey, like, can you make a public statement in case she is in a situation where she is in some kind of danger, it may put some public pressure on the Chinese government to release her from that. We saw something not 100% dissimilar, but on like a different level with French President Macron and the then Lebanese Prime Minister Saad Hariri when he was being essentially held captive in Saudi Arabia. And so, I'm not saying that this is completely ridiculous or couldn't help somebody's safety at all, but it did seem to be quite a change where in one day the U.S. media was, oh my God, you can't speculate why somebody is not in the public, to, oh my God, why isn't somebody in the public the next day? The U.S. White House also made a demand for proof of life. That's where I think that this, jumps a little bit far, and it actually makes it seem political to me, and not concerned about her safety at all. Now, she has been in public twice, and I guess you could put some air quotes around in public or something like that, because the events were, I believe, covered by like the Chinese state media, and so some people are saying that, oh, this really doesn't count, and I can see in a way that you can make that argument, but at the same time, if there was like some U.S. woman who, the lady who accused Joe Biden, right? If the Chinese were saying it's been 12 days since she spoke in the public, where is she? Did Joe Biden's goon silence her? Obviously, people would like roll their eyes and think that this gets a little ridiculous and political at some point. And so, she's been in public. And I'm not quite sure what the play here is, but the Americans are trying to roll this into a boycott of the Chinese Olympics, and Biden is apparently considering it at this point. Now, not a full-on boycott where we wouldn't even send athletes or like an official delegation, I guess, at all, but this would make it so like no U.S. officials are officially attending the Olympic Games as representatives of the U.S. government. So Kamala Harris, Joe Biden, senators and stuff like that wouldn't be attending the Olympic Games. This is, I mean, disappointing, because the Olympics were meant to, provide or I don't know about meant, but could be used to provide a platform for diplomacy. That's, what Ron Paul always talks about. Sports are a great way to break down some, real diplomatic intense issues. And while I'm not saying that going to resolve all the world problems if Joe Biden goes to the Olympic Games, but having a diplomatic boycott of it does show that the U.S. Is, trying to like enter a new Cold War with China. We also have the U.S. Congress calling on China to, the Congress is calling on the Olympic Committee to press China on human rights abuses. And, again, China commits human rights abuses. If the Olympic Committee didn't want to hold the Olympic Games in a country where there were human rights abuses, well, they probably couldn't hold it in America then either, but I would support that. Why the hell? But it shouldn't be the role of the American Congress to make that decision. And overall, I don't think the Olympic Committee is going to move China on this. Now, the other problem I have is, again, this is all for show, right? So if the U.S. really wanted to rein in a human rights abuser who was doing cruel things to its citizens in preparation for international Olympic or international sporting event, then maybe we shouldn't be looking at China, where we have essentially no, like minor influence. Maybe we do have large economies that are tied together, but Qatar is essentially an American proxy state, and they recently arrested two Norwegian journalists who were attempting to cover the conditions that the migrant workers in Qatar, who are building the facilities for the FIFA 2022 World Cup, were building, and they were arrested, I think held for 30 hours, and had their footage destroyed. And so it seems that, if the U.S. was really concerned, we could say no more weapon sales to Qatar until they make sure that all the like Filipino and Pakistanis who are building all these FIFA stadiums are paid, and not living in squalor and not treated like third class citizens, which they of course are. And we also had Qatar hiring a former CIA officer to actually spy on FIFA officials to get the World Cup bid in the first place. And this just is a part of something that we've seen several Middle East states do, including the UAE, to a far more nefarious end in Yemen, where they actually hired former either U.S. intelligence or special forces to go out and kill a bunch of political leaders in Yemen. But this is still troubling that, they're spying on different countries and FIFA leaders, former CIA members on behalf of the Qatari government. Real quick here on hypersonics before we move on. The Space Force General David Thompson, I don't think he's the head of the agency, warned that China and Russia were moving ahead of the U.S. on hypersonics. My feeling on this is that the race for hypersonics isn't all that militarily important. Where it is really important is on the budget sheet, and we're also seeing that not only just for developing the weapons, and so saying China and Russia are ahead means Congress is going to go, oh my God, how many billions of dollars does the Pentagon need to make sure that China doesn't have more advanced hypersonic weapons than us? But also they're going to build space-based systems to prevent and track hypersonic weapons. Now, this is absolutely crazy on several levels. We're weaponizing space, which we should be moving and trying to develop treaties to do the opposite on that and demilitarize space. But also, I think another really key issue on all this is just how much missile defense costs. And if we're going to try to put this technology in space, it's probably could potentially be what ends up bankrupting the American empire. When we're talking about the billions of dollars is going to be required to put these kind of systems into space, and they're probably not going to work all that well if we're being honest. All the U.S. Hawkishness against China and Russia has continued to push the two countries closer together. And this is the last story I have on China here. Dave DeCamp at antiwar.com writes, citing U.S. threats, China and Russia agreed to expand military cooperation. And, there's nothing very specific in here. It's not like, oh, we're now allies against the American empire. But it's another step. It's more strategic partners. It's more training together. It's more shared military project. It's more joint patrols, more actions together in the Pacific Ocean and stuff like that. And, while the U.S. could hold good relationships with both Russia and China, because neither really threatened the U.S., and essentially allow the negative relationship between those two, the issues between those two countries to come to the fore and be the main problems, we consistently make ourselves the main issue for both Russia and China.